What is going on, ladies and gents? Welcome to Collectors Gone Digital. My name is Josh, and on today's episode, we're going to be covering Mona's interview with Will from Cryptoys and David from VeVe. So we have a lot to discuss today. Be prepared. I know the community is quite divided on what happened, so grab a drink, grab a snack, sit back, relax, and enjoy. So before we get into the bulk of the drama here, I want to address a couple points that I've heard around the role of a reporter, but then also how she may have gone into the interview. And there's a particular post I want to address around that. So the role of a reporter is to light a fire. Whether that's good or bad, she did exactly this. There's no denying that. Now, whether the fire lit around her was intentional or not, that's something we discuss later on in the episode. But another comment I've seen is from somebody who claims to be in the same industry, who says that reporters often go into situations like this with a basic understanding, looking to learn more in the interview. Now, obviously, I'm not a professional reporter, but come on, guys. That is a ridiculous, and this isn't Mona's answer, but I want to nip that in the butt before anybody else kind of goes, yeah, that could have happened, because she's conducting what's supposed to be a roundtable interview with the 3 largest CEOs in the space. You think she's walking into that situation with a basic understanding of their businesses? Not to mention, she started the interview saying that she's been looking into the business models of all 3 businesses for the past 3 days, and if anybody needed to hire her, they could. That doesn't fall in line with a basic understanding. This probably isn't the best example, but same principle involved here. Tucker Carlson just did an interview with Putin. You think he walked into that interview with a basic understanding of Russia and Putin? Again, different scenario, but if you're sitting down with somebody that you know has an audience, and you know that that audience is going to tune in, you are going to prepare yourself. And then also, consider the fact that Mona is not new to the community, okay? She's interviewed the CEO before. So before I address anything else here, I want to nip that in the butt. I do not believe she went in with a basic understanding. And her saying she studied all 3 business models, that was a way to crack a joke and break the ice, set the stage, and show that she knows what she's talking about. And this is what brings me to our next point. So one of the questions that seems to be most controversial is when she asked David, what exactly is VeVe's business model? Because she doesn't exactly understand where they're trying to take things. I must be honest, guys, I do understand why she asked the question. And I was talking about it in a WebV space this past weekend, where even in that space, a lot of people were divided on the topic. The reason why I think it's a fair question is because, you know, it's obvious that Mona isn't as close to the business as some of the people who have been here since day one. So when you're close to a niche, you understand that niche. If you're not close to the niche, you may think that you know what it's about, but you don't truly understand the niche. A basic example of this is digital collecting in general, right? If you go outside this space to speak to somebody about an NFT or digital collectible, 9 times out of 10, they don't know what you're talking about. So for anybody who's been with the project for a while, who watches the project closely, you're closer to the business, the team, the product, right? And for you, it may be easier to see the business model. Another thing to consider here is that if you have been here since day one, you've seen that business model change. And so it may not be easy to put those pieces together for somebody who wasn't here all along. But the reality is this, and there's going to be a certain type of person that does not like hearing this. But VeVe is not simple. I know we've talked about in the past how the way of purchasing a collectible on the platform is simple. Yes. But everything past that, and even before that, is complicated. For KYC, even David talks about it in this interview, that people fall off during that process because all of a sudden they have to upload their utility bills, right? Then you put in your credit card. Buying a collectible, comic, or artwork is easy. There's no question about that. But then everything past that is complicated. From MCP to Omi Rewards Season 1, right down to the people on the team who explain the processes. So everything is still complicated. And if you've been around longer, you've had more time to absorb that information. For somebody that's quote unquote newer, and I don't even like saying that word because she's not necessarily new to the community, but for somebody who hasn't been as close to the project as some of us, I can see why it'd be harder to pick up on some of this stuff. Now, what I will say, and as I mentioned before, she started the interview off by saying, hey, I've been looking into your business models for the past 3 days. There is a big difference between looking into a business's model and looking into the history of the business. And not all of the questions that she asked supported the fact that she understood this history. And that's what brings me into my next point. So one of the questions that was asked that supports exactly this is what is VeVe doing to merge the physical with the digital? What are they doing to attract more physical collectors? Now, I gotta give props to Mr. MC1 because he handled this perfectly over on X, but he wrote out this long post that highlighted pretty much all the physicals that VeVe has dropped to date, to which Mona actually responds but addresses nothing said in the post. So I'll try and find it and toss it on screen, but in her response, she actually backs up her original argument that she did thorough research and she knew exactly what she was talking about, which again doesn't support that she went into it with a basic understanding. But she backed up her original argument that was already broken apart. So for example, her response was reassuring people that she did the proper research, but then doesn't address the countless Phigitals that were brought up in the post that go against her initial question. So how on earth can you back up the fact that you knew what you were talking about, but then you can't address the foolish question that was asked to begin with? On screen, I've tossed just some examples of Phigitals they dropped in the past. We got Superior Spider-Man #1, Frank Kozak, Jermaine Rogers, Addiction Comic. We have the Funko Iron Man, Matt Gondek's piece, which is a recent one. London Police, another recent one. 007 ticket from way back when. Christian Louis shoes. And that does not even include their CGC partnership, which I would argue is the most important thing on screen. VeVe is the first company in history to partner with CGC for something like this, and it's absolutely going to connect physical collectors to the digital space. Here's my biggest question though. I even remember Mona putting posts out about the Louis shoes when they dropped. She was well aware of Phigitals like these dropping already, but how do you sit face to face with one of the CEOs, in fact, the CEO leading the space, who has a dozen plus different products already released that connect physical collectors with digital? And then on top of that, you drill the question more into David to the point where Will actually steps in and defends him. But out of all the questions asked in the interview, I was actually driving and listening to it when it was happening. This question made me shut it off and listen to music because I couldn't even comprehend how you guys are making comments about how, oh, we got to get these guys back to changing the world. It's like you're wasting their time already with a question like this. And maybe this was a question that was structured more for the Pudgy CEO, but David's response to this question was listing some of the collectibles you guys see on screen. So he lists the collectibles and then it's a, yeah, but. There is no but. And that's something that I kept seeing throughout this interview, which is also something we're going to address later on in this video. Now moving on, I want to address this ending question as well because she finished the interview off by asking David if he can address our audience. When I went back and watched the video, I'm thinking to myself as David's answering, I wonder what Will's going to say to this as well. And lo and behold, the question's only asked to David. Now what I find really interesting about this is this wasn't the first time it happened in the interview where a question was asked that was fully applicable to Cryptoys, but only addressed to VeVe. And this ending question was the clearest and easiest way to see that it was one-sided because you cannot ignore the fact that Cryptoys has an audience filled with frustrations right now as well. Talk about their marketplace, right? And I have mad respect for Will. I think he presented himself very well in this interview. But you cannot ignore the fact that Will has to overcome the same obstacles, and some of those obstacles VeVe has already overcome. So it wasn't even the fact that she asked the question to David. It was the fact that she asked the question to David, but didn't proceed to ask it to Will. Now, if you watch the interview back when she actually asked this question, David stumbles. He says that he loses connection. I don't fully believe that that's what happened. But based off what was asked, I can fully understand why he would have been caught off guard. And if anything, I can understand why he might have been frustrated or irritated at this point as well. Now, I know we were just talking about David's response. I am going to address his answers in one moment here. But I want to address a point that I also keep seeing in the community, and that is the fact that tough questions need to be asked. And I'm sorry, no tough questions were asked. In fact, just based off some of the points we've already addressed here, I'd say that some of the questions were completely unnecessary. And I see some people making the argument about, oh, the Moon Boys are getting mad because holes were poked. No holes were poked. I also made the point about how they kept mentioning that the CEOs need to go change the world, right? They shouldn't keep them too long. But then they proceed to ask questions that were just asinine. I mean, come on. Do you think the Apple Vision Pro is a new trend? Really? Really? And keep in mind, guys, all 4 people on this call are CEOs. These are people that are in positions of authority, who have the spotlight shining on them. They've done the hiring, they've done the firing, they support people and their families on payroll. In the WebV space over the past weekend, we had a 𝗙𝗵𝗍𝗻𝗀 join, and he made a good point about how if you guys want to see some hard questions, you should sit in his board meetings. And it's the same thing with David. I mean, look at all the IP that they've signed. He's in charge of signing that IP. He travels the world to sit in some of these meetings. You think he sits in these meetings and they're asking him questions like this? Hell no. The questions that people like Will and David have to answer from IP are way more complex than questions asked in this interview. Now moving on, and for those that don't know, I will link this down below, but this is not her first interview with David, it's her second. And in my personal opinion, the feeling between her first and second interview was night and day. So in her first interview, and she mentioned this multiple times, she was catering to the mainstream audiences. She wants to try and help people who aren't too familiar with NFTs and crypto and digital collectibles to help them understand the space. Now, whether that was her intention with the second interview or not, definitely wasn't the same feeling. The focus was on David, but in this case, I'm not even talking about the questions. I'm talking about her pushing David even after he answered the question. I think that the interview is only going to be as good as the interviewer, and I think in this case, the interviewer was trying to be too assertive and too in control. Now this brings me to David's answers, and I can't admit that they could have been better and more confident. He did seem in this interview a little shy, okay? I don't know if that's just because of the more faces involved, but at the same time, I do understand he has to be very careful with what he says. Now again, I don't actually think he lost connection at the end of that interview. I do think he actually just stumbled. He was caught off guard by the question. But as a result of how this interview went, and how her first one went as well, which is why I'm even a little surprised he did the second one, I'm a little concerned that he's not going to be doing some interviews moving forward. And we addressed this in the space as well. I know some people made some comments about how I really hope this isn't the case. I'm in the same boat there. I hope he still shows his face. But in terms of what he's limited to be able to say, on top of how our community reacts to everything he says, I really wouldn't be surprised if he follows the same steps as others like Reese and Alex and people like that who have clearly taken a step back over the years. Now, shout out to Dr. Strange because he did bring up a good point on the WebV space this past weekend. And he was talking about how we shouldn't forget that there were supposed to be 3 CEOs. And that's totally fair. So we do need to consider that, you know, she could have been thrown off because of that third CEO not showing up. So for example, that question around Phigitals could have pertained a lot more to Pudgies, right? Because they're in Walmart and stuff like that. And because the Pudgy CEO wasn't there, she might have just diverted some of that attention over to David. Now, prior to the call, I did actually have someone in my Discord make a comment about how they thought it was going to be smooth sailing from here, just because they thought that the Pudgy CEO would have helped their audience kind of get exposed to ours. Now, a couple things with that, okay? Pudgy's audience is much younger than ours, and obviously we have the KYC process still. 2, I also saw, as the call was starting, a lot of people in the chat asking where all the Pudgy fans were. And if we're talking about an interview that was promoted a couple months in advance, it's something that you think their audience would see or know about, but in this case, it doesn't look like many showed up. Even if that CEO made an appearance, I do not think that the outcome of the interview would have been much different. And just going back to that whole comment about smooth sailing, for a company like VeVe, there is no such thing as smooth waters. So there's still a ton of obstacles, there's still a ton of challenges, and that would still be true whether that CEO showed up or not. So here are my final thoughts about the event. It was great to see Will and David continuously supporting and holding each other up. Will, by the way, is extremely impressive, very well spoken, big fan of the guy. I think he presented himself very well, and I also think he stepped in to defend David multiple times. They also kept saying a rising tide lifts all boats. We've heard the phrase before. I completely agree with that, and I loved hearing it. The overall format ended up being an interview, not a roundtable, okay? And a very one-sided interview at that. I understand it's a little bit more difficult to do a roundtable with just 2 CEOs, but I do think she still could have let them speak more. There were many questions applicable to Cryptoys as well, but we're focused on David. A perfect example of this is their marketplace. You ask a question to David about their business model, and in the process of doing that, you make a comment about how, oh, I know that Cryptoys is trying to do this marketplace and blah, 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 while VeVe has a running marketplace, and Cryptoys still has yet to release theirs. Now, when stuff like this happened, this is when Will would kind of jump in and defend David. There were many times where he did this. Now, another point that was discussed this past weekend, and I believe it was Sleepin that brought it up as well, is that it's her channel at the end of the day. And I agree with this completely. It's her channel. She can ask the questions that she wants to ask. If she wants to be more one-sided about it, she can. But if you're a creator putting out content and you're in the public eye, you have to be prepared for things like this to happen. And I do think she was. She's a CEO, like I said before. She puts in long hours. She's got people on payroll. She supports them. You have to respect that. She took action. She reached out. She got all of them on board. Another point that's actually coming to mind now, and I should address this before I wrap things up, is another comment around how it wasn't her questions. So first off, half the interview was her questions. And second off, we had mods in the chat gathering questions from the community for quite a while leading up to the community AMA. So they had more than enough time to filter out the bad questions from the community. So I just want to nip that one in the butt because I think that argument is dumb, to be honest. Other than that, I don't want to keep going in circles here. I think I've said the majority of what I want to say. I think there's always going to be videos I put out where I have some thoughts afterwards, where I kind of wish I included some things, but I think for the most part, I've included everything I can. Regardless of the outcome of this interview, I do still have to say thank you to Mona for putting the time and effort in to make it happen. A big thanks to David and Will, of course, for them hopping on as well. It was awesome to see the respect between both gentlemen. And I'm looking forward to seeing what both companies can do with each other in the future. Now, I was going to start the video with this, but I thought we'd end on a high. And that's the two new categories we got coming to VeVe, music and sports. So VeVe has officially announced a jukebox from Ron English that is going to play various soundtracks from his Delusionville. And this is going to be a series. So I am really looking forward to this drop. I think that jukebox is going to be highly sought after. I would assume that they probably drop more in the future and that there's not just going to be one jukebox on the entire platform, but who knows. And then we've also had a screenshot popping up lately, and that is boxing that's supposedly coming March 13th. But here's some speculation for you guys. On that screenshot, we had the VeVe logo on the actual glove, okay? I'm not too familiar with the fighter, but we've seen VeVe sponsor some races and crash up derbies and gaming events in the past. What if they sponsor this boxing event? Boxing is a massive sport, and seeing the VeVe logo on the inside of the ring would be amazing. And from what I understand, this fighter is also tied to Tyson Fury. If you guys don't know that name, search it. He's one of the greatest heavyweight boxers of all time. So just some speculation for you guys, but if that happens, I think the potential is incredible. Ladies and gents, that's going to conclude today's episode. I hope you enjoyed. That was a full in-depth recap of the METAMONA interview with Will from Cryptoys and David from VeVe. I know it was a controversial video. I know the community is kind of divided on this whole topic, so I would love your opinion in the comments section down below. But if you enjoy the content, make sure to like and subscribe. Comment down below what you want to see in a future episode. And as for our next, I'll catch you then.